Buenos días, buen día. Buenos días, ¿cómo están? My name is Caroline Eileen Fernandez. Me llamo Carolina Eileen Fernandez. O meu nome é Carolina Eileen Fernandez. And I will be the Master of Ceremony for today's event. At this time, I'd like to introduce the local response to the data that we just presented. If Marlene Pollock and Jack Livramento from New Bedford School Committee members, and Dan Gilbert, or Gilbert, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that, Gilbert.
Our surprise to any of us who've been working for equity here. I look around the audience and I see a number of people who have been fighting hard to change these statistics, and so I acknowledge all the people that are here. In the New Bedford Public Schools, and I do want to say that I think the 4% rate that they're saying are limited and English proficient is too low. I mean, we've been talking about problems with the assessment when kids come in, and so there are certain difficulties there. So that would skew a lot of the statistics. I think also that the absolute dearth of staff, teachers, principals, administrators at all levels that look like our very diverse system, it's just an outrage. You know, I know that I don't have any data specifically to point to or studies, but that when kids, if you walk into, especially New Bedford High School, it's like the United Nations. It's so diverse, it's so wonderful, and yet we do not have anywhere near the staff, teachers, or administrators that should reflect that and should give those students not only role models, but also encouragement. I know that there have been studies done that teachers of color will interpret students of color's behavior different than white teachers, looking at those students of color. So, and we've been talking about this ad nauseum. I want to acknowledge Dr. Daniel Carrigos in the audience, who is our one person of color administration. And, you know, she actually pulled together a professional language community, learning community of SEI teachers and guidance counselors and people who are very concerned with the direction of our SEI program. Mr. Livramento and I were actually campaigning in 2011 and ran into a teacher who said, you know, the whole program's going to hell. She was worried about the fact that there was no follow-up of students who left the program, that students were leaving the SEI program prematurely. I also got another teacher actually emailed me that she was very worried about students being if they have special ed needs, they were being either classified as special ed or ELL, but not both, because there was an absolute lack of people to speak to the students in their own language, couldn't translate the materials, mostly coming from Puerto Rico. We have also, Dr. Garrigo pulled together a meeting a year ago with the state officials of parents, and many parents came out who said in Spanish that they cannot talk to their teachers, they cannot talk to the principals and about their children. And we all know, of course, that the data shows that if parents work with their kids, they can do much better in school. So that whole avenue is out for them. So the professional learning community that was pulled together was to address all these things. At that time, the then superintendent, Dr. Francis, gave Dr. Carrigo the opportunity to do that. These 35 teachers and staff members worked for 4 months without pay and developed what I thought, and I'm certainly not an expert, but a comprehensive ELL redesign. And I want to say that the credentials were there. One of the criticisms is that the current leader is not qualified, doesn't have the background or the credentials to lead the SEI program. So one might say, why is she there? You know, but So they came out with this report just at the moment when Dr. Francis was ousted and the interim superintendent came in. And unfortunately, I want to say that this wonderful document was not enacted. And I really believe that had it been enacted, we'd be starting to see turnaround, because they addressed the K through 5, the middle school, the high school, and I understood that it was hard, new administration, lots of changes, but I thought there could have been a phased-in approach. I thought we could have looked at where we could have done things, particularly at the high school, to have a newcomer program, a students with interruptions in their formal education program, to, the reforms were modest but would have had great outcomes. And, this has not happened. We also tried at different points to recruit, and there are other people in the audience who were involved in this, Latino principals, housemasters to come, and qualified people. None of them got hired. So and I think there's really a lack of understanding of how much it would mean for students to see somebody who looks like them, who can speak to them, who can speak to their parents, who can advise them, who can assess them correctly. So I think that we have been pushing. We had a vote a year ago. I remember the day, July 9th. We lost to adopt that plan. And I feel very strongly that we need a push from the community. We have a new superintendent coming in, and I hope that, we sent her the plan, and I hope that she will take steps to implement it. But it's within our grasp. We can do it. We just have to value every single student and say, this is not acceptable, a 50, and I want to say a high dropout rate among Latino students, but also, and this happens with low-income kids, other kids of color, there's a push-out rate. It's not just a dropout rate, they're pushed out. I know about this both through my own students at BCC who've told me many stories, as well as Third Eye Unlimited, which some of my family members were involved in. And your story, what you said, I mean, that happens to so many kids. Oh, you can't be this. Don't do that. You can't do this. Very low expectations. And again, if you have a more diverse staff, you would have expectations that would allow students to rise. So that's what I wanted to comment on, and I just welcome everybody here, and I hope that we can all push together to turn this around, because it's within our grasp. I think we need to support Dr. Danielle Carrigo, who is out there fighting for, and I do want to say, she doesn't just fight for the Latino students. Yeah, Dr. Carrigo, would you say? She doesn't just fight for the Latino students. She fights for all the students. And I think that's what has to be our mantra, that every student is precious, that every student is our student, and that as a community, we cannot move forward with economic development, with getting the good jobs. I mean, we're going to get the wind power and the turbines, and that's wonderful. But we could be getting many more. I believe that lots of firms, and I know the former Chamber of Commerce, started the Smiles program in the same way, believing that if we could elevate the educational level of our students, we could attract much better jobs. New Bedford's a wonderful place. It's my adopted city. I love it. And I think that we can do much better. But I call on all of you. We need help to push the powers that be to take this seriously, to see all the potential. And one last thing I want to say, we honored the 10 highest MCAS awardees. And every single one, well, I shouldn't say every single one, but most of them were of Portuguese descent. And when I first moved to this area, I was like shocked at the anti-Portuguese immigrant attitudes that were so prevalent. And hearing about, patients in St. Luke's couldn't get a translator. They'd have to call the custodian in to translate medical information. And certainly weren't in we had bilingual education then, but which was better than what we have now. And I thought to myself, had we had a different attitude toward the Portuguese immigrants, then we could have had those outcomes much sooner. And so the same thing is true with the Latino immigrants. These are our new immigrants. Let's see them down the road as the highest MCAS performers and do what we can to make that happen. Thank you.
Pauline said it all. I should just sit down. But just to add a little to that, looking at the statistics as they stand there, they really are an eye-opener and shocking, mainly in terms of, at least for me, when I look at the high dropout rates. When I was running for school committee, like 2 or 3 years ago, those are the statistics that stood out then, and they haven't changed. They really, to a certain extent, have gotten a little bit worse as we keep on walking down this road. And that is connected to almost everything we do in our society. You don't graduate from high school, you get a poor job, you earn less, you don't own your home, and you keep on walking down this road that never ends, because that cycle began way back when you were in the 3rd grade. And that's the problem. So that's the area that I think we need to concentrate on, at least beginning, is to make sure that each and every student who steps out of that 3rd grade is really able to read at that grade level, so that when they walk into the 4th grade, they're prepared to move on and to keep up with the rest of the students. When I was a youngster, we encountered the same, as was indicated, we encountered that same story. Many students, at that time they called it tracking. Students, were put on a particular track. You went down to Roosevelt and you either were in the business track or the college track or the general track. And guess what? All too often, if you were a person of color, you ended up in the general. Because guess what? You're not going to college. I mean, it's almost like they told you you're not going anywhere, and they're going to make sure that you don't go anywhere by putting you in a general education. And yet, there are a number of students who succeed beyond that. And so that's what we need to really look toward, to say that all students have that ability once we begin to implant in them the idea that they can succeed, that they can go through the process of obtaining a good education if we go through the process of pushing them a little. And we as community need to do that. We need to ask that of our families, of our students, that they no longer can accept the average. They have to place themselves on a more difficult track that makes sure that they get into, the advanced placement classes, that make sure that they get ready to get into college, even if they need to go through a 2-year preparatory course. So those are the basic statistics there in terms of that area. And the other area that was also an eye-opener is math. Because you begin to wonder, what is the connection between math and English and your ability to speak that language? Because I always did well in math, because it was just numbers. So I'm always surprised at that, but right now the MCAS math test is really centered, it's really based on language, because you have to be able to comprehend what the math problem is asking you to do. And if you can't comprehend that, guess what? If you can't translate it into your mind, you're not going to succeed. Because it's not just doing numbers. You can memorize the times tables, the addition tables, and all of those. It's not going to help you because you don't understand the problem. And so it's making that transition of really being able to understand the words that's critical. And the other part, I guess the other area that I like to look at is mainly how we get involved with our school systems. And I'm looking at parents of Latino heritage or Cape Verdean heritage, Portuguese. We need to be involved in the school system. We can no longer go through the process. My parents relied on the school system. When they sent us to school, they said, hey, you go to school, pay attention, do your work, come home, study, you'll do well. However, they weren't there to make sure that I was getting the best education possible. I did, but they were not knocking at the door if I didn't, or for those students who didn't. And that's what needs to happen, is parents and other interested adults need to be at the doorstep of our schools, knocking and saying, why is my child not succeeding? What is happening here? Why are these statistics continuing to prevalate or continue to grow within our city? How can we change that? And that's the next step, I think, of, we started with one process. I'll just talk about that one area, and that's innovation schools. We come up with one innovation school at the Golden School that's going to be starting at the Renaissance Community School for the Arts. It's going to be starting this fall. Great, that's great. And to me it's critical because it's starting in a school that is, again, predominantly, I think it's predominantly of students who are in low income area, students of color, students whose primary language is not English. And when this school succeeds, it will begin to demonstrate to all of our schools that all students, if you go through the process of expecting and delivering a good education, that they will obtain it and they will succeed. And that's the first step. Once we begin to demonstrate to everyone that all of our students can succeed, they all will. It just is the natural, if you want to call it, the natural way. That we all can succeed, but we have to look for that success, and we cannot relegate students to being general students when we all have the process. We all have to choose to be the best that we can be in whatever area we want to be. Thank you for listening.
My name is Dan Gilbert. I'm an organizer with the Coalition for Social Justice, and we've been working on issues of education equity in New Bedford for about 11 years. And most recently have worked pretty hard on the ELL issue that Marlene talked about, gathering signatures on a petition and gathering testimony from residents of public housing, many of whom are Spanish speakers, many of whom are Latinos, even if they do speak English, and are very concerned about this issue. I wanted to comment on the research and make a couple of points. The first is that the inequalities that are being talked about in the research are pretty striking. I mean, you're talking about a dropout rate of 4 years of 31%. That is a ridiculous number. And as you saw from the statistics, that number is quite a bit higher if you go to the 5th and 6th year, because some people have been held back a year, but they end up dropping out of school. So we're talking about something like a 40% dropout rate. And that is totally unacceptable. It's extreme, and it needs to be addressed. Also, the gap in the MCAT scores in the 10th grade for math, with 28% versus 42%, is a big gap when it comes to the numbers of people that are not meeting the basic requirement. So that's one of the things that stands out to me. And so for people that are concerned about the schools in New Bedford, and there's a lot of people that are concerned coming from different angles, people have to understand that this issue of inequality as it relates to Latino students is central to that struggle. And we're talking about a population that's severely disadvantaged, and at the same time, a population that's now about a third of the students, and increasingly so. So if you want to change the school system, you have to address that issue. You can't just ignore it, and you certainly have to take advantage of any opportunity to move forward on that issue, which, as was explained by the previous speakers, has not been done up to the present time. The second thing that really stood out to me in the statistics is that it's more than a Latino issue. It's a general system-wide issue. The statistics about African Americans that were in the written report and weren't stressed as much in the statistical presentation, African Americans are almost as disadvantaged as Latinos on most of the measures, and in fact on some of the MCAS measures are behind Latinos. African Americans are not the same percentage anymore as a population, but it's a significant number, and it's a significant constituency of people that have a history of fighting for educational equality. We have to link those struggles, and we have to reawaken the idea that racial inequality for African Americans as well as Latinos is a pressing issue that we need to address. Combining those two together, you're talking about a more powerful group of people working for something that's fairly similar in both cases. And remember, in that case, we're not talking about, and this is true for Latinos in many cases too, people that do not speak English. We're talking about English-speaking people that are still stereotyped as less than, stereotyped as not as smart or having parents that are not as concerned, and based on that, are not expected to do as well. Going beyond, though, African Americans, I was struck by the statistics for whites. Because although white statistics come out better than black or Latino statistics, they are still very low relative to the state. The dropout rate, as I recall, for whites in the table was 19%. That's very high, too. It's not ridiculously high, like 31%, but it's still high. And again, if you take into account the 5th and 6th year, you're talking about in the mid-20s, that's a substantial dropout rate. Why is that the case? Because the white population in New Bedford is largely a working class population, and is significantly a Portuguese immigrant population of people that are not well educated themselves and are still looked down on as their kids are, well, you're the child of a manual laborer, your parents aren't college educated, you don't have the same abilities as these other people. And so I'm sure if we did statistics based, for example, on people that are getting free lunch, we would find also discrepancies and low levels, certainly relative to the state. And so the reason I'm saying that is because we can talk about this as a problem that affects the entire population of students. We can bring together people that are concerned about education for their children, regardless of what segment of the population they're coming from. There's only narrow segments in this city that are getting the kind of quality of education that they need. The inequities are very broad and they cut across lines. So I think there's a lot of potential for making progress, because if we can embed the struggle for equality for Latinos in a broader struggle that includes African Americans and includes working class and low-income whites, that is, and includes people I left out who are affected by special education, which is an issue that cuts across lines and again has a very, very high dropout rate. We bring that all together in one package, we have a force that can be reckoned with on this issue. And so I hope that people will work on these issues, come to school committee meetings, get involved in groups that are active, including the Coalition for Social Justice or any one of the number of other groups that are working on these issues, and also get involved in the election campaigns of people that are trying to do the right thing. Marlene and Jack were elected because not just themselves and the qualities that they have, which you can see here are ample, right? But because of the people that got involved at a grassroots level and put their time and energy into reaching out to the voters and saying, these are good people, these are people that really care about all the children, vote for them, and that's why they won. You know, and Marlene won twice, and Jack almost won the first time, and now has won, and we can do it again with other people as well. So thank you very much.
If anyone has any questions or comments, please feel free to do
Good
so.
morning, everyone. My name is Darlene Spencer, Director for New Bedford Community Connection Coalition. The coalition has been around for 15 years in New Bedford. We've done a lot of work as well in addressing equity and access to education in our community. I just also like to say I've been a social worker in this community for quite a long time, for over 20-something years, and I also grew up in this community. So I certainly, as both personally and professionally, have seen the struggles that all our children of color have experienced in this community. I too would like to acknowledge Danielle Camilo for the work that she's done within New Bedford Public Schools. The position exists because of the work that a great number of community members did about 11 years ago within the Bedford Community Connections Coalition to develop the job description for the position of Assistant Superintendent of Diversity and Equity. I mention that only because this work has been going on for a long time, and I appreciate the remarks that Marlene and Dan and Jack have given. I'm coming off, and I'm speaking, and I think I'm feeling very passionate about this, more than usual. People know me. because I actually just came back from a 3-day conference in Boston at Wheelock College around challenges and opportunities, global opportunities and challenges for facing children, youth, and families. The conference itself looked at challenges around education, health, and human rights. And I think when I left Boston on Saturday and did a lot of reflection on the state of the education of our children in the city, the one thing we're really missing in the city is reframing this work that we're doing regarding equity of education access. This is a human rights issue. And I think we're all very passionate and strong about this. I think we really need to link this to the agenda for the United Nations for Children. In looking at these statistics, we're not surprised at all about the people we walk with these statistics. Not only we walk with these statistics, we live with these statistics. We are these statistics. So I think that we really need, as a community, number one, to really reframe the work we're doing and reframing in a way that we're seeing this as a human rights. All our children, our Latino children, our Cape Verdean children, our Portuguese-speaking children have a right, it's a human right, to have access to equitable and quality education in our city. The second piece of this, I feel, though, is I'm really happy, and I missed the beginning, I'm sorry, it's the end of the fiscal year, I'm a little crazy over at my organization. I missed the beginning, and I'm really happy to see the Gaston Institute here to support us in this issue. Because of how large this issue is and how deep this issue is, we as a community, we have to step up, but we also need help from entities like UMass Boston, UMass Dartmouth, Wheelock College, major educational institutes. We need help from everybody. We need the support, and that's just having done this work for so long, and we just need everybody's help. We need everybody, and I don't consider anybody an outsider. We in this community sometimes think and look at saying, oh, outsiders. We need everybody. We need the resources, more importantly, to come in and support us. And I think people know, I don't want to go on and on, but my opinion about the district going into receivership, I really felt we did, because we needed the resources in order to support our children at this point. We don't have them. We're trying. I understand there are people that are trying to get resources, but again, it's really a deep issue, and we need everything that we can get in this community. Thank you. Human rights.
Good morning. Yes, exactly. Lisa and I now are a professor at UMass Dartmouth, and I have worked for a long time with the Central American immigrant community in New Bedford, first with the Organización Michael Pacheco, and then for the last 5 years with the Centro Comunitario de Trabajadores. And in addition to this being my research area, I do research on the immigrant, primarily Guatemalan and Salvadoran Central American immigrant community in New Bedford, and I've also done work in Central America with the communities from which those migrants come. So we're really talking about international processes and really transnational issues of human rights. I just really want to make a couple of asking questions and a couple of comments, and I think some really exciting directions for future research. And of course, one thing that I would love to see is more collaboration between the two universities. Both being part of the same system, that they're not organic, right? And it's something in terms of how it's not that Walter Gaston or UMass Dartmouth, it's how the system is kind of structured, that there aren't these sort of built-in kinds of conversations. So I want this to be a moment that we can continue to work on. I mean, ironically, you're in an anthropology department. I'm in an anthropology department, and today is really the first time that we're getting to meet. And again, this is just part of how the UMass system, I think, has been set up that really separates us rather than brings us together. And I really want to applaud Gaston for the tremendous resources, for the research that people have done. I think this is a tremendous opportunity for all of us. I guess a couple of things. I want to say a few things about the community overall, and then a few things about education. So I think that some things, directions where I think we can push this is looking a little bit more minutely at, for example, household and family and gender composition of the community, because right, so we have, the percentages, and again, I'm really mostly familiar with New Bedford, and these are terrific. And I looked at the American Community, survey as well from 2006, but to look at, the shift, not just in the numbers, but the shift in, a community of male sojourners, which is sort of the classic immigration model, to a community more of families. And certainly, Father Mark and other people who are involved in the religious community had noticed a kind of baby boom, right? Lots of baptisms. So we can tell, right? That's, the Mayan baby boom, which, Father Mark kind of coined that term a couple of years ago. So just noting things that don't always show up, in ACS or in census figures. I think the things where, perhaps we can, through ethnographic data, through people who are here on the ground, can kind of complement that. Family births, tracking the birth rates and tracking the number of births, I think would also be something that would help us understand, again, the growth. So where do we get that, median age of 20-something, and looking at really the shift in the composition. So putting that together with the statistics on the school, we can see where that, bubble is coming in terms of school. In terms of, jobs, I think that there's clearly, a hidden part of the economy, right, the informal economy, and people who are not employed in the city where they live, but employed elsewhere. So, for example, I spent the other day interviewing a Guatemalan woman who's been here for 17 years, formerly worked at a seafood processing plant, and is now, picking the organic strawberries that I brought from Silverbrook Farm last week at the little urban market in downtown New Bedford. So if we look at, and for every, I think, family, couple, or woman from Central America who works in a garment factory, works in seafood processing, works in a bakery, there's a babysitter, right? And so that's a part that won't show up in what we look at as employment statistics, or people who work part-time, or people who do things out of their home, who sell tamales, who sell tortillas, who sell. So I think that there are ways that we can probably complicate and expand a little bit the employment and the unemployment figures. And then looking also specifically at which local industries, which sectors of the local economy. I think New Bedford Economic Development has some of this, but where those labor forces are concentrated. It's no secret to anybody in New Bedford that the seafood processing industry largely depends on undocumented workers. That's who the labor force is, and other industries as well, where certain parts of jobs, cleaning, shucking fish and clams. So I think that that's something that we can kind of expand what you have done. I was thinking about your comment about labor, about human rights, and thinking also about labor rights, and that's also another area that CCT, I know Adriana is going to be here in the afternoon, but this morning we were working with people at one of the local places where people work overtime, they get paid minimum wage, but can pay no overtime. And so many cases that CCT has helped bring to the Massachusetts Commission Against Discrimination, the Attorney General's Office, settlements that talk about tens of thousands of dollars of people who are just underpaid. So if we look at why those low incomes, it's minimum wage jobs, and it's people who are working 80 hours a week and getting paid no overtime for the additional 40 hours a week. So I think those are some areas that we can think of, and Jose and Kim from the Labor Center have been very involved in helping kind of advocate and helping strategize and work with people who are, at jobs that are covered by union contracts, that helping to advocate for those rights. And then, just in schools, to just add, I guess, in the detail of, needing more from parents as well, because there's so many parents who can't read. I do a lot of reading notices that people bring in saying, mi hijo me trajo esto de la escuela y yo no lo entiendo. It's like, what does it say? What am I signing? What are they asking me to do? And then how that also affects children's reading, because if you have, a stay-at-home mother who was not literate in her own language in her country of origin, has limited proficiency not just in English, but it's not literate in Spanish, not literate in Quiche, not literate in whatever other immigrant language. And I think this probably is true to some degree, and perhaps a little bit less so, but depending on where in Barcelona people come from, literacy, particularly for women, is we know lower worldwide than it is for men. And so what does that do in terms of children's educational attainment if there's nobody at home who can help the child read, who can check the homework? And so I think educating the parents and adult basic literacy for the parents, and my other colleague from UMass and I were just kind of conspiring about this, in terms of thinking about ways that we can join forces between, anthropology and the School of Education in terms of helping to do some of adult basic literacy, as well as more ESL classes targeted at the immigrant community. So I'll shut up for now. And yeah, so what UMass, of course, we're in a budget crunch, as are you. We're getting cut back. Great ideas, thinking about how we can possibly pull some resources from the university to do something. I don't know, but definitely, more conversation to be had.
I wanted to respond to the question of Professor Nader about the partnerships with among UMass campuses, and I want to say that the Gaston Institute is a statewide institute, which is why we're in this year in New Bedford and next year in Pittsfield, and we always welcome collaborations with other campuses of the University of Massachusetts. Right now we have a project with UMass Amherst looking at health, some health issues. So yes, we are very much interested, for those of you who are from the UMass Dartmouth, very much interested in collaborations, and I actually think it's a great idea to involve the students at the university doing community service and service learning courses here, providing education to parents and also tutoring the children.
As a clergy person, I have a lot of issues with families. They have a lot of problems. And the thing is, everything starts with the education. Thing is, some people, especially the Spanish community people, they have the English barriers. Sometimes they don't know what's going on in school. And they don't know, so they don't interested in to know either, because nobody can tell them what's going on. So, but they usually come to the churches and talk about it. That's the thing. And what happened is, we have children, maybe 16, 17 years old, one or two children already. And some parents say, why they have to give in condoms in school? They invite them to do that. So that's one of the things we have to issue, because people, sometimes when they provide something, that's okay to do. And that's what happened. Sometimes we have to have a lot of problems, because people, as kids, they don't know better, They need to be teach in these kind of problems that they're going to have later on. Because if I have a children, 16 years old with two children, sometimes three children, I see this going on every year. It's not increasing in education, but decreasing in the education. Because when they have two or three children, they don't want to go back to school no more. And that's why you have a lot of those dropouts right now. So we have to establish something. I don't know what we're going to do, but we have to get together and we have to plan something we can target these issues. Because if not, we're going to see a population that's going to be decreasing, especially in the education, and we don't know what's going to happen. But we have to target these issues right now. It's the best time to do it. And I see a lot of people interested in doing so. So I appreciate if we can get together one of these days and make some kind of plans to target these issues. So, thank you.
My name is Liz Souza, and I'm from Bristol Elder Services. I'm a protective services worker, and our office is located in Fall River. I work with elders at risk, ages 60 on up. Pero en mi otra vida, yo soy Elizabeth Lebrón, hija de padre puertorriqueño, nacida en Estados Unidos y criada en la isla. In my other life, my last name is Lebrón, born of Puerto Rican parents, born here in the States, but raised in the island. A few things that I've noticed is that I've lived in Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, and I went back home for a little bit with my children. And I have a suggestion, if it hasn't been done, for the research on education on our Latino children. Has anyone ever researched the concept of how education is seen, especially like in the island of Puerto Rico, where pretty much from kindergarten through high school, English is taught as a second language. It doesn't always work right, but it's there, in the colleges and such. But what I've seen is the reverse discrimination among our own people, that tú eres muy blanquita, no puedes ser puertorriqueña. You're too white, how can you be Puerto Rican? Or, you know, or you have a college degree, you wouldn't understand me. Where are our Spanish-speaking doctors? Where are our Spanish-speaking psychiatrists? I mean, when we work with elders at risk, and I see a lot of not only poor Puerto Rican elders, but also elders that are here from other countries that came with a visa. The visa has expired, and now they're here without any kind of social services through the state because they don't qualify. People that don't qualify for Mass Health or any other medical insurance. But then we see that big gap of the very poor Latinos and the very rich Latinos. And most of the time, and I can tell you I've seen this from having lived in Hartford and having lived in, living now in Rhode Island as well, is that the only time you actually see them is for the Puerto Rican parade, the Dominican parade, or anything else that has a political connotation. I may be wrong, but we need to get our own professionals out there, not us here, because we do this every day. We do this for a living, and we're out there in the trenches. But let's get our very big, noticeable professionals into the community so that our kids can see them, but without that part of discrimination that we force on our own people. You know, ay, él es un doctor, you know, unreachable. Or la maestra. Someone mentioned about parents not being interested about their kids' education, and I don't think that's true. I think it's the part of intimidation. And that's why it'd be interesting, too, that if you do a research comparing the education in Puerto Rico, but maybe other South American and Central American countries, is the concept of education outside of the house. And what happens in the house stays in the house. What happens in school is the school. But you have also a lot of people that are illiterate. I've seen that. I work with that. So just a little piece out there, thought for the day.
Broadway Education Association, I've read Education Makes America Work. And I thought it was very interesting. You got 1% of the population controlling over 45% of the wealth. I mean, that's by the government's own and accounting measure. You know, 1 out of 5 kids living in poverty. You know, 2009, 2010, corporate profits captured 88% of the growth in real national income, while aggregate wages and salaries accounted for slightly more than 1%. I mean, you have places like New Bedford that are rationing out-of-date textbooks and schools that can't even afford toilet paper, you know. In fact, my kid is in a middle school in New Bedford and constantly complaining, you know, the last couple of weeks that there's an entire floor that has no AC. You know, I mean, these are moral obscenities in our schools. There's no doubt about it. But there's one thing that I'd like to mention before. But by the way, that sign, you know, Education Makes America Work, is actually true. You know, the question is, for which America is education working? You know, certainly our kids in New Bedford or Brooklyn are not getting the same experiences as Brookline or Weston, for example. But the question that I have, I mean, the point that I want to make that I think is critical here is in regards to educational research. You know, countless education research has shown us that standardized testing is not the only measure of achievement and really not a valid measure of excellence. So when we point out these statistics about educational sort of the high stakes testing, the scores and so forth, without pointing out these facts, what we do is in fact reinforce, the power of high stakes testing. And I think that that's a major problem. And I know that there are a lot of educational activists in the room here. What I want to know is where do we all stand on movements like, for example, the opt-out movement of high stakes testing. I mean, that's a big movement across the nation right now. You have Fair Test advocating for it, you have Citizens for Public Schools advocating for it, you have Rethinking Schools advocating for it. You have a major win in Seattle where the high stakes test has actually been scratched. I mean, this is going on across the country. Where are our educational activists? Why can't we continue pushing that rather than pushing for sort of alternatives for a small amount of people, like innovation schools? I mean, I have some concerns with that only because it distracts us from the major battles, right, of transforming the entire system rather than creating these pockets of change. I think that that's problematic, and I do agree with Pauline Pacheco and those who advocate for innovation schools.
Absolutely.
98% of the time. The innovation schools I just have some issues with, and I wanted to put that out there. The other thing is that I think we need to be very cautious of selling ed reform, educational reform, as an alternative. In other words, selling educational reform as an answer to class inequality. Because what we have here is not just sort of the achievement gap. I mean, the achievement gap doesn't exist just in education. You have a healthcare gap. You have the gap in mortality. I mean, you can name all kinds of gaps. I mean, the achievement gap in education shouldn't be the only gap that we're discussing. Thank you.
Soy de la Iglesia de Dios de la Profecía de Fort River. Voy a necesitar traducción.
I'm going to need translation.
Gracias. Es muy importante realmente conocer sobre este tema.
I would like to take the time to thank for this opportunity that you are giving us, because I think it's really important to think about this subject.
Sin educación no hay desarrollo,
Without education, there's no development.
pero tampoco hay familia sólida, no hay sociedad.
But there also isn't a solid family nor a society.
¿Por qué digo esto?
Why do I say this?
Lo digo porque independientemente de los esfuerzos que se hacen en las escuelas, en las universidades,
I say this because despite the energy that is being put in schools and universities independently,
es muy importante prestar atención a la familia.
it is very important to pay attention to the family.
Tenemos que hacer alianza mancomunada
We need to be more united
en unidad versus las instituciones académicas, los padres,
versus the academic institutions being the parents or the family.
definitivamente que tenemos que comenzar de lo que nosotros estamos haciendo
Definitely we need to begin from what we are doing
para lograr mejores resultados.
for us to get the best results.
Hemos estado haciendo algunas investigaciones
We have been doing some research
sobre estas necesidades
about these necessities
en base a nuestra comunidad,
based
la
on our
comunidad
community,
latina.
the Latino community.
Lógicamente nos preocupa
Logically, this worries us
porque queremos formar parte de soluciones
because we want to be part of the solution, or form solutions, create solutions.
y solo lo podemos lograr
And only we can do this
a través de la educación.
through education.
No obstante,
Nevertheless, sorry,
¿cómo podemos
how can we
verdaderamente motivar
truly motivate
a las personas
people
y hacerle entender
and make them understand, or
lo
have them
importante
understand,
que es capacitarse?
the importance of improving oneself?
Si realmente no hay una base de motivación
If in reality there isn't a base of motivation
en su hogar.
at home,
Y ahí entramos nosotros hasta cierto punto.
and that's where we come in up to a certain extent.
Tenemos que saber
We need to know
no solamente los recursos que existen a nivel académico,
not only about the resources that exist academically or in the school arena,
conocer la verdadera necesidad de esa persona,
but also really know about the necessities of that individual,
para que realmente
so that in reality
se trace metas
they are able to complete goals,
y pueda entender la importancia
and they may be able to understand the importance
que es educarse.
that what it means to be educated or educate oneself.
Entonces,
Then
es importante
it is important
tener un acercamiento.
to have a relationship.
No
or
basta, no basta,
Not only,
en mi opinión,
in my opinion,
lo que se hace a nivel general, se necesita una relación más directa.
not only what we do in the general sense, but there has to be more of a close relationship.
Y así
And that way,
vamos a poder
we can
llevar todos estos recursos de educación
bring all of these resources of education,
y que puedan completar
and that they will be able to complete
su meta
their goals
a nivel educacional.
at an educative level.
Por lo tanto,
For that reason,
hemos estado haciendo un acercamiento
we have been forming relationships or getting closer to,
no únicamente en nuestra iglesia,
not only in our church,
sino en el pueblo,
but also in the community,
para identificar
to identify
cuáles son esas barreras
what are those barriers
que limitan
that stop
al individuo
the individual or
a
limit the individual
desarrollarse.
to develop or progress.
Hay que entender que es importante su valor, su autoestima,
We need to understand that it is important for the person to understand their value,
Todos-
their self-esteem,
que hay igualdad de oportunidades,
that there is equality of opportunities,
que es posible,
that it is possible,
pero para esto
but for this,
es importante
it is important
que ellos lo crean.
that they actually believe it.
Y así
And in that way,
vamos a poder acceder
we will be able to access
a esas opciones
those options
que se están ofreciendo.
that are being offered.
En ese caso,
In this case,
tenemos que desarrollar programas
we have to develop programs,
especialmente para los padres de las personas adultas,
especially for the
para
parents or other adults,
concientizarlo, primero de la importancia que es involucrarse en la educación de sus hijos.
so that the parents understand the importance of being involved in the children's education.
Pero a veces están muy ocupados,
But sometimes they're very busy,
o ellos verdaderamente necesitan
or
ayuda
they really need help
para poder entender
for them to understand
que tenemos que guiar
that we have to lead
y ayudarlo
and help
a lograr las metas
The
a nivel
children.
educacional.
the children achieve these academic goals.
We'll take one last question, and then we'll have a working lunch break. It's great. What Carmen has mentioned is very important. This is a great opportunity during lunch to connect so we can all work together. One last question, please.
Special education. Hi, my name is Daniela Carrigo. I am the assistant to the superintendent for equity, diversity, and family engagement. And I also want to say that I'm very grateful. Darlene mentioned it. This position, I'm often asked, how does New Bedford have such a position? The position exists because the community came together and said it's needed. And there would not be such a position if the community had not come together and said it's needed. I will say that there's not a specific cutoff on IQ. The question on special education is, given a child's IQ level, are they performing at the level that you would expect them to for that IQ level? Now, that does not mean a child that might have Down syndrome, that child may be performing at the level you might expect, but they still merit services. So it's a very complex issue, and there's a lot of legality around it. One of the things, though, that I would like to do is just share some statistics that you haven't seen. One-third, 31%, as of last year, of the students in New Bedford are Latino. Less than 3% of the faculty are Latino. And that 3% is primarily concentrated in our paraprofessionals. Paraprofessionals are often called substitute paraprofessionals. And that way they can be let go without any access to unemployment or other services. So they're kept at that level. And that's where the majority of our Latino staff are located at this time.
My mom who's here is actually a paraprofessional for the school system. She's one of the few Latinas, so it's a problem.
Right, it is a problem because the district is able to say we have almost, and the district is often proud of this, 3% of our faculty that's Latino, but it's not representative of the administration, the people that are able to make change, or teachers that are in front of children as a role model. That is a concentration within a group that is routinely the highest cut and routinely the poorest paid. So I think those are important statistics to keep in mind. Also, 1 in 5 children in New Bedford comes from a family that understands Spanish better than English. And yet, we have one principal that speaks Spanish, and she speaks Spanish as her third language. Her first was Portuguese, English, and she's learned some Spanish. That's one. So if you are a parent, you have a civil right to access, this is a civil rights issue, you have a civil right to access to information in the language in a form that you can understand. That means if you don't read, you have a right to have that information given to you orally. And if you don't speak English or understand English as clearly, it doesn't help to speak it louder, it doesn't help to give more information in English. It helps to give parents information in a way that they can understand in the language they understand. That is their civil right. And if that language happens to be Quiche, that parent has a civil right to that information in Quiche. Unfortunately, at this time, there's not one paid Quiche speaker within the district. I think these are important things to keep in mind because we're about to go through a leadership change, and Dr. Durkin has made it quite clear that she is eager to work and meet with the community. She has asked me to try to set some of those meetings up. If you are a faith-based member, if you're a community member, I would be happy to help you organize those introductions for her at your site. I often find that parents are a little uncomfortable walking into schools. It is a generational issue. If you're a first generation, you often trust schools, but you don't always go there. They know best. I don't need to go there. They'll take care of my child. By second generation, you figured it out. But now you don't trust schools. So you don't go there because you know it didn't serve you well. So how is it going to serve your child? So there is more of a tension. But with both groups here in New Bedford, things are not necessarily working in the way they could. And this is a growing population. Last year we had 55 kindergarten children who entering were Spanish speakers to the extent that they needed an English language learner program. This year, and that included students that were held back, and one of the facts is that English language learners are held back at a greater rate, and English language learners that are then transitioned into all English populations are also held back at a greater rate, but New Bedford doesn't do what I consider an efficient job at following up on those students once they've transitioned. This year, we have 80, and we have not finished our kindergarten registration, and that's not including holdbacks. So you're seeing a doubling in the number of children walking in who are Spanish speakers at the kindergarten level in need of ELL. I think those numbers are really important because with this change in leadership, there is a need for an awareness that this is a growing population at a time that we are shrinking the number of people able to service children and their families in the language they need best. What I have found is if you hold family information evenings, all in Spanish, they're packed. People told me over and over again, well, you know, the Latino parents don't come, they really don't care, they're not so concerned. We even have a translator there. I've been to those meetings. The principal holds the whole entire thing and then says at the very end, if you speak Spanish, it's in the back of the room. No, it's time to start saying we need to hold the entire meeting in Spanish, and if you speak English, it's in the back of the room. And then an entire meeting in English, and an entire meeting in Cape Verdean Creole, because that is a growing population for us as well. Some of the things that we also need to do is change the way we're gathering our statistics. What I mean by change the way we're gathering our statistics, right now we do not keep statistics on who is of Cape Verdean descent. Cape Verdeans can list themselves as black, they can list themselves as white, but we don't keep statistics on who is of Cape Verdean descent.
Any other questions or follow-ups to Daniela? Gracias. That was very, very informative. And from the Gaston perspective, we look forward to work with the new superintendent. As you know, what we do is provide data and information, but we have here two people who have been working with Boston Public Schools, in which we have a very good partnership with the Boston Public Schools, in which we do the research and also in collaboration with the district. And together we think about implications for public policy, for changes in practices, and for changes in programs. And it seems to me that having the opportunity of the new leadership and the system will be a really great opportunity, but it is an opportunity to have new leadership, and we may be able to partner to look more in depth at the data on the different Latino groups as well as the different English language learners groups. So thank you.
Okay, we are ready to grab something to eat.